Hello, greetings everyone. This is Matt from WSDOT. Can everyone on the line hear me?
Yeah, I was muted.
Okay, well thank you, I appreciate that. Just as a check, can someone please verify that they can see everything on the GoToMeeting? Posted to the screen, there should be a PowerPoint introduction screen.
It says map target.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so with that being said, it's 1:30 on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Thank you for joining WSDOT and FHWA as well for a MAP-21 target setting safety webinar. Just for a heads up to everyone on the phone before we do introductions, the webinar is being recorded, so for weeks and months in the future you will be able to view this. We'll have it uploaded to our website, and also just to let everyone know, we are not having this as a closed forum, so if you could mute your phones, we'd like this to be a dialogue at some point and an open line, so please mute your phones while the webinar is in progress, and we'll move forward from there. That being said, this is Matt Koenig with WSDOT's Tribal and Regional Coordination Office, and we'll announce those that are in the room as well.
Ida from Skolvik, I'm with WSDOT.
John Milton, WSDOT.
Don Peterson with Federal Highway Administration.
And Matt Clark with WSDOT.
All right, thank you. And thank you again to John and Ida and Don for spending your time with us on this Friday afternoon to share some information statewide. We do see who joined the webinar via the link in the room here. So we appreciate all of your attendance. We'll move forward with the beginning of the presentation now. And like I said, please be sure to mute your phones as we do have an open forum. So I will turn it over to the presenters.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. So just to look at our agenda today, we've got part 1 and part 2. Part 1, our goal is roughly an hour, maybe even less. And we'll go over basically an introduction of what we're going to talk about. Then I'm going to hand over to John Milton, and he's going to talk a little bit about Target Zero and the significance of Target Zero when we think about target setting for safety. Go through the federal rulemaking. We've got Don Peterson from the division office here from Federal Highways to help us if we say something that's out of line. And then John's going to share the proposed approach and alignment of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, something that's been shared with the MPO directors before. Also answering a very common question we're getting, what if we don't meet those targets? And then he's going to switch over and hand over to me, and we're going to talk about data summaries, the Excel spreadsheet tool that we developed for you, and that we're going to update with the VMTs for 2016. And then I'm going to hand back to John, and he's going to talk about the timeline, and then we're going to share some key contacts for you. And then we're going to shift gears a little bit. In part 2, we're going to deal with questions and answers, and here we hope that you'll jot down your questions as we talk, so that we can have a really good conversation. If you have questions, it's likely that another MPO has similar questions, so we'd love for you to participate with us on that. So we've had introductions already, so let's, John, if you can go ahead and talk a little bit about Target Zero, target setting approach, and so forth.
All right, so many of you know that Target Zero is Washington State's Highway Strategic Safety Plan, or Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And this operates, at least for the department, as its North Star, and it's something that we rely very heavily on for the development and approach and how we look at safety and the issues related to safety. We like this document as it provides our ability to kind of outreach externally to our partners, but also bring in multiple disciplines and different ideas about how highway safety can be done throughout the state, and with different aspects and different treatments in terms of both modes and how we approach things. We develop it through a formal process. So as you know, Target Zero goes through a number of different meetings, a lot of different discussions in developing and identifying both the emphasis areas and the strategies that come out of what we're going to do. WSDOT has also developed an implementation plan, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but the implementation was an idea that we had to better explain essentially that our program would be how we're approaching safety, how we're implementing it overall, both in terms of improving the planning process as well as improving how we program projects, which is very important to us as we move forward in trying to reach Target Zero. The latest version of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan is 2016. Now, the federal requirements for the Strategic Highway Safety Plan is that it's updated approximately every 5 years. The update schedule that Washington State has had is approximately every 3 years. We do that because it provides us the ability to modify the plan as necessary, but also because it is our North Star. It's a very important aspect in how we do business. Right now, Target Zero focuses on a 2030 time frame, so reaching zero deaths and serious injuries by 2030 is the way that we look at this plan. So I wanted to talk a bit about federal rulemaking. In the federal rulemaking, we have final rules within safety, and that was done in April 2016. While there are federal rules that are final, there's still discussion that's ongoing in certain areas that really is, what does this federal rule mean and how can it be applied? It's important to recognize that this rule is, well, the safety performance rule. There's also a highway safety improvement program rule, and there's a highway safety program rule that is more of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration rule. All these things play together, and there's discussions that are happening between WSDOT, the Traffic Safety Commission, about how things should be put together. That's important because there's requirements in the federal law that we operate with exact numbers. So states must report performance targets annually through the Highway Safety Improvement Program. We have an online reporting tool that we do that through, and NHTSA does the same thing for the Highway Safety Plan. I'm going to try to avoid using all the acronyms because they're very close and very confusing, even for us who work with these every day. The bottom line is that the USDOT requires both WSDOT and Traffic Safety Commission to report annually its progress towards achieving its goals and objectives within safety. So together with the rules, essentially we were looking at 3 overlapping rules. We've talked about these. The overlapping rules are fatal injury frequency, fatal injury rates, fatality rates, and serious injury rates. And let me say that again. It's fatal frequency, fatality rates, and serious injury rates. Okay, those must be exact. In addition to that, the Traffic Safety Commission has approximately 6 other performance measures that they must report on. We don't report on those with them. We have 2 additional reporting metrics that we have to report on, which they don't report on. So that would be serious injury and the bicycle and pedestrian combined rate. So next slide, Ida. It's important to recognize how we interact together as well. So the federal rule, the way that it was set up, is that DOTs would work with their state highway safety offices to ensure that we're working together, number one. The other thing is that we'd have a closer, much closer working relationship with our metropolitan planning organizations. And in doing that, there was a requirement that was set out in the federal rules that talks about setting safety performance targets for the metropolitan planning organizations. And what that means essentially is that a MPO must set performance targets or adopt the state targets after the state DOT establishes those targets. Now, and that's what part of the discussion that we've been having approximately for the last year is how best to approach this together. And most of the discussion that we've heard to this point is that Target Zero provides that good guidance for us that we can all operate off of, and that both the Traffic Safety Commission and the WSDOT, as well as the MPOs, could essentially establish those targets through the Target Zero Safety Plan. The other issue that we have here is that to the extent practicable, I love these legal terms, I like the word practicable, MPO targets must be consistent with the targets established by the state. And each MPO could, if they choose to, plan and program targets consistent or establish a numerical target specific to the MPO planning area for one or more of the individual measures and support the state target on the other performance areas. So essentially what that means is there is the ability for an MPO to set their own targets within their own MPO area, and to establish how they would plan and program their projects within those areas, or adopt the state targets and essentially the measures pretty much directly. And essentially what that would mean is that there'd be some level of allocation of different rates or frequencies that would be to the individual owners of the targets. So again, that would be something that it is going to show how we propose that might be done. So the metropolitan planning organizations, the DOT and Traffic Safety Commission are in the process of beginning to report. So Federal Highways just sent us a document of how we're going to be reporting within the Highway Safety Improvement Program. Once we go through that process, of which we have a delivery day of August 1st, I think that's the right date, that we will have set our performance targets. From that date, 6 months later, 180 days actually, that the MPOs must set their safety targets or adopt WSDOT targets. So that would be February 27th, and I'll at the end of this presentation, I'll give you a timeline of what that means. HSEP targets are reported by the state DOT, so we're required to report the targets for essentially everybody. And what that means is that the MPO HSEP targets are not annually assessed for significant progress. I'm going to talk a little bit about significant progress in just a moment and what that means for meeting the state targets. The state essentially is the entity that's going to be reporting the targets overall. So how we're doing as a state versus how we're doing as individual MPOs. Although we'll be looking at how we're doing as individual organizations, the onus is essentially on the state for the reporting requirement. The significant met or made significant progress, which is a very important part of the discussions that we've been having. Made or met significant progress means that we've met at least 4 out of the 5 targets that we've set within the agency. Now, this is an important discussion because what we've essentially decided within our organization is the recognition that meeting 4 out of the 5 targets, giving the variability within any highway safety program over time, is likely going to lead to an agency not meeting all their targets every year, year after year. There's just so much variance in number of fatalities and number of serious injuries that that's a likelihood of what's going to happen. In addition, if you look at how we've been performing in terms of bike and pedestrian safety, we have seen a pretty common trend towards slightly increasing frequency of those events over an extended period. It's either flat or increasing. So our expectation that it's not always likely that we're going to meet that 4 out of 5 targets. Sometimes we will, sometimes we won't. What the other measure is, and I think that this was set up by Federal Highways to allow states like ours who have target 0 and aspirational goals of really trying to achieve high levels of safety, that if our safety performance is better in the following year from which we set the target, we can achieve what's called significant progress. So what that means, if we see a downward trend over our crash targets, we're going to be accepted in terms of having met our targets and not necessarily actually have to meet the entire downward trend if we just have a downward trend. So even though we might set a very steep number, if we just have some level of reduction, we're going to be okay. Now, but what I have suggested to our executives within DOT is we expect over some of the time frame that we aren't going to meet targets, that we will essentially have some challenges essentially be met with the penalty. It's not called a penalty, I think it's a consequence or something like that, but that there's going to be some consequence that the DOT will have to take, and again, I'll discuss that, I think, in the next couple of slides as well. The proposed approach that we have in alignment within the Strategic Highway Safety Plan is that we would have a baseline 5-year rolling average that is established from the 2012 through 2016 timeframe. This has been a rather lengthy discussion and a little bit confusing for the state because we were getting two different discussions. The NHTSA side of the house was told that they would have one trend line, and we were having a discussion about being a different trend line. We just had a meeting to come to agreement and a letter issued by WSDOT headquarters that outlines what is an appropriate approach for the DOT in the Traffic Safety Commission. And this is essentially the first time that we're certain that the 2012 through 2016 timeframe is going to be appropriate. We're going to use and suggest a linear projection to 0 in 2030. So from 2016 to 2013, we would just basically draw a straight line between those two dates. So where we are in 2016 and where we need to be in 2013. And that's in alignment with our Target Zero approach. States, why that's important is that states can set different ways for determining what is the appropriate trend line. We think that the simpler the approach is, the more acceptable and understandable it will be by the public. So here's an example of that approach. So adopt the state target. So in 2016, we have this 202.2 crashes, fatalities. And again, remember, this is a rolling 5-year average. We recognize that you're not going to have a 0.2 of a fatality. That is a drop towards a 0 trend in 2030, and the target essentially for the 2018 timeframe would be 173.3 crashes. Okay, and we may round here, but the bottom line is that you can see how we're doing that. It's just taking the 5-year rolling average, 2030 0 target, 2030 to be 0, and the target is 173, and so that's how we'd approach it in the first go around. And if you could go back to that previous slide, what's important here is what we're showing in terms of the measure, this fatalities measure, is that this would be an approach, for instance, for the Puget Sound Regional Council. So that would be how their number might be derived. And again, Ida will show you a tool that will help with that type of determination. Now, here's an example of state targets for the Puget Sound Regional Council, a little bit more. So the baseline is 2012 to 2016, rolling 5-year average. The target 2014 to 2018 at 173.3. Okay, so what happens if we don't meet the target? So WSDOT is required to develop a state DOT Strategic Highway Safety Implementation Plan. Kind of recognizing the opportunity here, we developed an implementation plan in 2015 as kind of a first approach. What we wanted to see is how we might be able to go about showing what the program is, what it does, where it could go, so that people can understand essentially the overall approach from at least one state DOT's perspective. There are some additional direction that may come out of directions that will come out of FHWA after the rulemaking. But the idea here is to be inclusive, to have discussions, and to be transparent about what we're thinking in determination of safety. So we've got a head start in comparison to most DOTs. The other thing that is required is that WSDOT DOT must use its obligation authority equal to the HSIP apportionment for the fiscal year prior to the target year for HSIP projects only. That's a really long sentence, but really what it means is that DOTs essentially, when they're given, and many of you may already know this, so forgive me if it's being repetitive, we get obligation authority over our entire federal program. What this is saying is that the very first thing that if we don't meet our targets that the Federal Highways Administration would like to see us do is to address highway safety and appropriate to use the obligation authority within the highway safety program right off the bat, so that making sure that essentially that we're addressing safety and we're addressing what we're trying to achieve in terms of our targets. This may have some consequences for us in that over the last few years we've seen decreases from year-to-year apportionment in the amount of money we're receiving for federal highways. So that became a pretty significant discussion overall. The DOT is it's trying to work out its program. What would occur if we had a $2, $3, $4, $5 million hit? And I think the bottom line was that we can work through that. This is going to be okay. And what's important to recognize in this is that the only organization that's affected by not meeting targets is WSDOT. It doesn't affect the Traffic Safety Commission, nor does it affect the MPOs in terms of any quote-unquote penalty. So the other thing that we've had to deal with is where does the data come from for determination of these targets? Now, the data sources, is this your slide?
Yes, John. I'll take over from here. So let's talk data. And I hope the data folks at the MPOs are listening up here. We've received a number of questions and really concerns that people have, and so we hope that this webinar will help with that. So the federal rulemaking very specifically says that we have to use FARS, the Fatal Analysis Reporting System data, for fatalities and fatal crashes. And in our state, the Safety Commission is the data steward for that data. And then also for serious injuries and serious injury crashes, the state DOT data. And we've built a really good relationship with our Safety Commission. And in the beginning of when we looked at the proposed rulemaking, there was agreement in the room that we wanted to make things easy for you. We wanted to save you the time of going to the Safety Commission, entering into a data sharing agreement, and so forth and so forth. And so for that reason, WSDOT has went ahead with agreement from the Safety Commission with the appropriate data sharing agreement for release to prepare data summaries for you. And I'll demonstrate the tool in a little bit. We have made some assumptions. There's some very specific rules that exist for example, a fatal crash has to involve a motorized vehicle. We're applying the same rules to the serious injuries as well. So we're taking care of all of those items for you already. Then the other component that we have to deal with is the vehicle miles travel data that usually is not available at this time of year. It's usually in August or September is when that data becomes available. While our data office was kind enough to move the timeline up for us, and so we'll be receiving the VMT estimates from the HPMS data, the Highway Performance Monitoring System, very shortly, and then we'll update your tool for you. Now, using the VMT from the HPMS is another requirement set by the federal government in the rulemaking, and so we're keeping very close to that. In terms of the VMT estimates for the MPOs, we're applying the exact same method that's being used by HPMS for estimating VMT at the county level. So, so for those of you that have MPAs that are not closely coinciding with counties, don't worry about it. We are taking care of that process for you. So I'm actually in the midst of processing the 2010 through 15 VMTs for those areas as well. Okay, so let's have a look at the tool, and I'm hoping that this live demo is going to work really well. When I added the slide in, I thought I must be crazy to do this, but let's have a look. There's 3 spreadsheets that was sent to your MPO directors, and so it has the documentations and assumptions tab. Nobody reads that, right? Well, the data folks, this is your sheet, okay? It has contact information for the tool, for all the different data sets, and who the key contact people are. So please have a look at that. Anytime you see something in red, that's an indication that it's going to be updated. So by mid-June, we plan to release an updated set of spreadsheets that will have the updated VMT data incorporated. Okay. So one of the things that we heard from you was we want to see all the numbers because we want to be able to generate the graphs or just print the graphs that you got. And so that's exactly what we did. So here's our statewide example. So if we zoom out a little bit, you can see that we've got the whole table there for you with all the different data elements that we use to set the targets and also to create the graphs. We've also added, and sorry for jumping around a little bit here, we've also made a simple graph with that just shows what is the rolling 5-year averages, and then also shows you how we got to the 0 at 2030. Because there was a number of questions about how the rolling 5-year average works. So let me stop and answer that question first. So if you look at the number that is in the 2016 cell, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So if you look at that value, 484.8 for the year 2016, how did we calculate that? That's the total number of fatalities from 2012 through 16 divided by 5. That's basically how that number was calculated. And then we go and we set a target for 2018 by taking this number, 484.8, and projecting it in a straight line to a 0 at 2030. So you can see your targets are right there where you can just look at it. Well, I see some beautiful red numbers, and we said previously that anytime you see red, that means that's something that's going to change. And this is because the VMT was not available in the beginning of April. But with the next release of the spreadsheet tool, the VMTs will be filled in, and there will be no red, okay? So, so I just want to zoom in on the red writing so you see there to be updated in June 2017 using the 2016 VMT values, okay? One of the other things that we heard from you was, you know what, can you just make the graphs for us? We are really busy. We've got a lot of other things to worry about. And so we've done that. And we've made sure that it's all unlocked. You can modify the colors, go right ahead, have at it. Okay, they're all there. And I'll show you when we look at our spreadsheet tool for different MPAs. You'll see that as you do the drop down, all of these things automate. Some of you also said, well, you know, I'd like to have a worksheet that just shows the graph by itself where we can add notes, right? So we've gone ahead and included that as well, and these will update automatically as well. Okay, so let me close up the statewide file, and let's go to the MPAs that doesn't closely coincide with the county boundaries. So if you click on the purple, select an MPA, you can go ahead and pick something from the download. Okay, so let's do the Benton Franklin Council. We're not picking on you. We just think it will be a good example. Okay, so what you will see here is that the spreadsheet looks slightly different because there are no VMT data here. Not for you to worry, okay? In just a few weeks, mid-June, you'll receive your updated spreadsheet and we'll have the VMT data in there. We didn't want to make up values, okay? So at this point, you can only see 3 targets, but you also have your graphs. Okay, so let's switch to the other spreadsheet, and those are for the MPOs that closely coincide with the county boundaries. So I'm going to zoom out so you can see how the graphs change. Okay, and we're just going to pick one. And so you can see automatically your graphs update for you. And if you zoom in, again, the detailed table, table 1, is filled in for you. And you can have at it, do with it whatever you want. And table 2 will show you the performance targets for 2018 then. Note that 2018 is also a rolling 5-year average. We work in rolling 5-year averages here. Okay? So I'm going to keep these open just in case we get a question from you, and then we're going to switch back to the slides. So, so the following few slides just basically shows the statewide numbers as they stand. Quick reminder that we do have VMT for 2016 that's not yet available. So where you see a rate measure, those will definitely change. I don't know how much. We'll still have to see. Okay, so there's our fatality rate, and again, anytime you see red writing, be sure to pay attention there. Okay, but it's basically the same that you saw for your region. Okay. These are coincidentally also the same graphs that's in the folio, and I believe that Matt is going to make sure that the folio is also where you can view this video. In the folio, describe all of what we talked about today, and then I think John Milton added some really valuable information for you as well in our conversation today. But if you have any questions, you can have a look at the folio as well. That's a really good resource. Okay, John, I'm going to hand back to you on a discussion about the timeline.
All right, so one of the questions that we had is, what is the timeline? And what we have here is basically the timeline from final target setting to when the MPOs must submit essentially their deadline for the target. In May of 2017, we agreed to final target approaches and measures for number 1, number 3, and number 5 with the Traffic Safety Commission. So that is fatalities, fatality rate, and serious injury rate.
No, just serious injuries.
Oh, serious injuries. I'm sorry, it's Friday. I apologize. By mid-June, essentially, the final target measures for number 2 and 4, so that is serious injury rate and bike and pedestrian combined targets. We'll have the 2016 VMT information, and we'll do the target setting for that. By July 1st, 2017, the targets for measures number 1 through 3, so again, those are the ones that coincide with what we're doing with the Traffic Safety Commission, will be reported. Again, remember, since they have to be exact, that essentially sets our targets for both of the agencies on that date. October 31st, 2017 is when we are required to finalize our HSIP reporting, and all 5 targets will be reported out at that time by WSDOT to FHWA, and we'll have a discussion with Don as we're going through that. That will set the 180-day ticker, essentially. So 180 days after we've done that HSIP reporting deadline, the MPOs must have their target set, either agreeing to plan and program the product so that they accomplish the state DOT HSIP target, or commit to quantifiable targets in the MPA, either by adopting your own targets or having targets that are consistent with how the WSDOT has set their targets. So that's where we are at this point, and it would probably be a good time to take any questions, but first you want to give the key contacts?
Yes, thank you, John. So very important through this process is that you realize you are not alone. There's a team at WSDOT and Federal Highways that are there to support you and to answer your questions. This is a collaborative process, and we want to make sure that you are comfortable with what is happening and that your questions are answered. So from a planning perspective, Matt Koenig is your key contact. He's the guy that talks to the MPOs. Okay? I only talk to the MPOs when Matt says you can talk to the MPOs. And that is so that you know whatever goes out from Matt's office is consistent with all the federal rules, all the things that I don't, as EDA, don't know about, okay? So Matt's your first contact in terms of those. In terms of the target setting for safety specifically, that is John Milton. He's the agency representative for that. For the spreadsheet tool, it's myself, Ida van Skalkwijk. Fortunately, you do not have to pronounce that. No worries, and Ida works too. And then the data contacts are all in the spreadsheet tool. So if you have questions about WSDOT crash data, your MPO may not be using the crash data at this point, and you want to get access to that, the contact for that is in there. If you want to go ahead and get access to the forest data through the Safety Commission, the contact is there. And then some. So let us know if you have questions. We're happy to answer. And so with that, then we move into part 2, where we're going to take your questions and have an open discussion. So I'm going to see where I can get, see whether there's any questions in the chat box. I don't see any questions there, so if you can go ahead and unmute your phone if you've got a question, and let's go ahead and hear from you. We're happy to assist you.
Hey, this is Charlie, if I could, up in Seattle, if I could. Can you hear me?
Hi, Charlie.
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah. So the question I've got is, what have we figured out yet? What does it mean to program projects consistent with the state's target? That language.
Yeah, you know, I think that there's room for discussion as to what that means, but ultimately, what I think is that we have specific target areas and emphasis areas and strategies that go along with that. What I'd suggest is that there's a lot of room for interpretation as to what that means, but essentially run off the road crashes might be something, pedestrian bicycle crashes is another emphasis area. I think what we need to be able to do is characterize how we're achieving each one of those independent issues as part of the overall discussion, Charlie. So to me, I think there's flexibility within what that means. It's just because I think the different MPOs may have different sorts of emphasis, and you can see that in the actual crash data.
Yeah. Could we agree?
From a federal perspective, projects that reduce or eliminate serious and fatal collisions are those appropriate projects. So like John said, it's going to vary from place to place depending on what attributes or what's leading to serious and fatal collisions.
Right, but the question is, so we always, for example, when the state produces the HSIP list, we always program those projects. So, right. I mean, we bring them into the TIP and we program them. So that's, right. You know, that's not a question, so we do that. What's come up before is there any implication here for the project selection that we do for the CMAQ or the STP dollars that we program? And maybe we can't answer this today, but I was hoping that we could commit to a discussion between WSDOT, FHWA, and ourselves to figure out a common understanding to what that means, just so that we're able to explain it to our boards and they'll feel comfortable with it.
Right, and it's part of what you're maybe suggesting here is that there be some level of safety as an identification of some of those other funds. So performance metric might be used in helping determine the overall benefit of a project. For instance, reduction in fatal crashes as part of this mobility project or something like that.
We always do that anyway, so we have safety as part of our project selection, but it's just not clear what it means that, you know, if you're not to, it's just not clear. I wish if we could just have commit to having a discussion about it so that we get roll up our sleeves and understand it and come up with a definition that we all can agree on.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's a definite yes, yeah.
Thank you, Charlie. I see Matt Koenig writing like crazy. He has an action item now to follow up on. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Make sure you unmute yourself. We've all spoken to ourselves when the phones are on mute.
Does anyone have any questions regarding the spreadsheets that were distributed by Ida several weeks ago? I know we went through a brief demonstration on this webinar today, but did folks have additional questions on those spreadsheets? I know we had a couple trickle in over the last couple weeks, so if there's anything remaining, please feel free to ask.
Just as an update for you, when we release the updated version, it will have a few more drop-down items. When I attended the Thurston Regional Planning Organizations meeting, their county and cities asked for their data to be displayed as well. So it's something that we can do fairly easily. So the next version will have that, and we hope that that will be helpful as you work with your counties and cities as well.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to add, this is John, to the extent that the safety performance and the safety targets are something that's a little bit newer to us in terms of dealing with it, we'd like to make ourselves available to assist you if you choose to use us to help interpret or work with the data or work with the interpretation of the data. We have the ability to, I think, to do so, and since this is a partnership, we're all working on this together. We hope that some of you might take the opportunity. In part, that's why we developed these spreadsheets, I think, to be helpful. If there's other things that you can think of that we could assist with, please don't hesitate to ask of us.
Does anyone else on the phone have any sorts of questions? And it doesn't have to be just limited to the discussion today or the presentation. I know we've been talking about safety target setting for over a year now. So many of the questions that are broader probably have been answered. I know we've had many safety technical team meetings, but the questions don't have to just pertain to the presentation today or the spreadsheets. We do have some time. Of course, there's no problem with ending quite a bit early, but we really want to take this time to allow anybody to ask questions that you feel that can dig a bit deeper. Okay. Well, Ida, Don, and John, do you have other comments you'd like to say to the group?
Well, this is Ida. Just to share with the group, one of the other requests that we've received over the last year is from some of the MPOs is to have a summary of the Target Zero emphasis area performance. And so our plan is to, in July, August timeframe, to release a set of spreadsheets that will allow you to look at your emphasis areas as well. And then I would welcome everybody to go and look at the WSDOT Public Crash Data Portal. Let me quickly show you how that works. We're hoping that this will be a valuable tool for you. It looks like it wants to test our speed here. There we go. So the Public Crash Data Portal is the first in a multi-phase project that is aimed at making crash data available to you as agencies at a very high level, but also to the general public. There's a second phase that WSDOT is working on that will be secure, that will allow agencies that have gone through the formal data sharing agreement process to access much more detailed data. So we would like to encourage you to use this tool and give us feedback here at WSDOT about how well it's working for you and how we can improve it. John, you have any last final comments?
Again, it's important to recognize that each year we're going to have to go through the target setting process. This is our first go at it, and I know it wasn't seamless, but to the extent that you have ideas or recommendations for us as we move forward, things you'd like to see, we'd appreciate any feedback on how to improve the process overall. We're encouraged essentially as to how this went, but it didn't go perfectly, and we didn't expect that. We have a lot of work to do right now as the DOT to kind of finalize the process. It takes us about a month to go through the HSIP reporting with a couple of people, but overall, we're looking forward to the next year and a reduction in fatal and serious crashes, which so far this year we're actually seeing a pretty good trend. Let's hope that it sticks that way. So a little bit down, not a great deal, but it's down. So thank you. I have nothing else.
Don?
I guess I might add, I wrote a few things down as I was listening, and I'm not sure whether there's anybody out there that's wondering what happens to your targets once you set them. And I might add another point on the timeline that on the HSIP annual report that's due in August of 2018, WSDOT will be reporting all the MPOs targets in the HSIP annual report, just for your information. So that's basically what happens with your target setting. The fact that you're setting targets that are supposed to be consistent with WSDOT's targets, your targets are really figured in the overall state target, and that's why it says that they'll be consistent with state targets, and your targets won't be assessed in making significant progress to meeting the target, the state's overall target, other than the fact they're included in.
So the information that's reported in February of 2018 is the information that will be rolled into our
2018 HSIP annual report.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Don.
As folks were making their final comments around the room and prior to me going into any action items, did any questions come up amongst anyone on the phone while the final comments were being made? Okay. Well, with that being said, we have, like I said, been talking about this topic for well over a year. I think that might be why there's, some clarity on many of the things. And so I'm just going to review the action items today. Like I said, this webinar will be able to be viewed after the fact. But just wanted to touch on, thank you, Charlie at PSRC, for the comment about programming projects to really focus on the safety targets and how that process will be done. And so hopefully we can come to terms with a mutual agreement on a definition and discuss the process between WSDOT, the MPOs, and FHWA. Also, if folks would like assistance in working with the data or the interpretation of the data, please feel free to contact Ida and provide John with additional feedback as to how this process has gone this year and any improvements in the future. And then with that, and hearing no other questions, we can go ahead and conclude. The one thing I did want to mention, and hopefully I'm not putting folks in the room a little bit on the spot, but as this process is moving forward, will there be future, in the next several months, any additional technical team meetings scheduled with the MPOs?
I can't say for certain, but I'd expect that there will be some level of discussion as we go into allocation of what are the target, what could be the targets for the individual MPOs. So
okay,
that's where I think it would be mostly.
Okay.
Do we get the right breakouts? How are you going to approach this moving forward? Because the expectation might be that some of the MPOs may want to vary a little bit on what they're doing in terms of their specific areas.
Okay. All right. Well, with that being said, thank you folks for joining us on a Friday afternoon for this 1-hour webinar on safety target setting, and we hope you all have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.